So last year at the Oscars, as many of you already know, I did a video or two on this subject. Will Smith, the actor and former rapper and also producer on the new series Bel-Air, which is a dramatic retelling of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, where Will Smith is ultra angry and every white person is an evil white racist and all of that. Again, we talked about it on this channel before. Decided to walk up on stage and smack Chris Rock across the face just based on the fact that he told a mild joke related to his wife, and his wife got really upset because if you remember, Will Smith was laughing, then we saw this face from Jada Pinkett Smith, and all of a sudden Will Smith had an issue, and this was ridiculous and absurd for a number of reasons. First and foremost, this was clearly and obviously the day that Will Smith was going to finally win that Oscar. They had seated him in a central location, the camera was constantly focusing on him, and the idea is, for these actors, is that when you have a real comedian hosting these kind of events, you're going to take a joke or two because this event is glorifying all these wealthy elite celebrities, and you shouldn't be too serious about it. But Will Smith was not having it. He got angry. He attacked Chris Rock. Then he put out some crazy apology video, which again, we also covered on this channel. But now Chris Rock has dropped his Netflix special, and of course, the reactions to it from the far left are ridiculous and absurd. And that's what we're going to talk about today. The CNN segment where they had somebody from The Root essentially arguing that Chris Rock deserved to be hit because he dared speaketh ill of a black woman. But before we get into that, this video is sponsored. So let me toss it to the sponsor, then we'll bring it back over here and we'll discuss this whole thing on the other side. Bad sleep is an epidemic in this country. 164 million Americans report poor sleep quality. This is one of the reasons why I'm using these amazing pills over at sleepwithajw.com. These pills have 7 essential vitamins and minerals to help you get a great night's sleep. And again, it's all in one pill, so you don't have to take a whole bunch of different things in order to have a good sleep aid. And if you go over to sleepwithajw.com, you can get your bottle for 51% off, 60-day money-back guarantee. That is sleepwithajw.com.
Even still, people have a lot to say about Chris Rock's Netflix stand-up special in which he skewered Will Smith for slapping him at the Oscars. I've been hearing from a lot of people, primarily black women, who think that the coverage of the special is missing the mark. Rock's strongest words appear to be directed to or at Jada Pinkett Smith, the target of his Oscars joke last year.
So first of all, the framing of this story from Don Lemon over at CNN is already ridiculous and absurd, and the fact that he's bringing on some woman to complain about Chris Rock apparently being way too harsh towards black women doesn't make any sense at all, because if you watch the special, you'll realize, and if you know anything about Chris Rock, that he makes fun of everybody. In fact, there was a whole entire section related to January 6th. Where were you January 6th? I was in a car dealership trying to buy a car, and the guy at the car dealership was trying to tell me that frame damage wasn't serious damage. Then I looked up on the TV, and then I saw our republic was getting frame damage. Where were you January 6th? The day our democracy fell. Where were you January 6th? The day democracy worldwide collapsed. Where were you? Where were you?
Rock traces his beef with her all the way back to 2016. That's when, according to Rock, she attempted to get him to quit the Oscars, to not host the Oscars because Will Smith wasn't nominated for the movie Concussion.
So you have entire portions of this special that have absolutely nothing to do with black women, absolutely nothing to do with Jada Pinkett Smith. In fact, this whole Will Smith thing wasn't really addressed until the end of the special, but of course, they find one activist over at The Root who wrote up a stupid-ass article to talk about how Chris Rock is actually targeting black women, and because Chris Rock dareth made a joke about Jada Pinkett Smith and about Will Smith on the night of the Oscars, again, a night set up to honor them specifically, then all of a sudden, you're in a situation where Chris Rock is engaging against violence against black women because jokes against black women are now violence. Therefore, it's justified for Will Smith to assault Chris Rock on national television. It makes no sense. It's absurd. It's ridiculous, but let's roll into the segment.
Nobody's picking on this. She started this. Nobody was picking on her. She said, me, a grown-ass man, should quit his job because her husband didn't get nominated for Concussion. And then this gives me a concussion.
So first of all, Chris Rock is a comedian. This is a comedy special. Even if what Chris Rock was saying in this portion of the comedy special wasn't 100% accurate, factual, or whatever, there would be nothing wrong with it. However, and this is incredibly important, everything Chris Rock did say at that moment, the clip that they played, was 100% true. Will Smith was in a phase where he was trying to do movies that he could get nominated for Academy Awards for because he wanted to win Best Actor. There was that Pursuit of Happiness movie, there was the movie about concussions, the one where he played Muhammad Ali. All of these movies were intended by Smith to get nominated for the Oscar, and then he didn't get nominated. But one year in particular, there were not any black actors nominated for Best Actor or Best Supporting Actor, which again is not that unusual in terms of the Oscars when you consider the fact that there are years where there are multiple black actors being nominated, and again, they don't represent a giant, significant portion of the population. They're definitely there, but when you go from 1 to 2 out of the 5, you're talking about 20% represented by 1 to 40% represented by the 2 out of the 5 people nominated for the Best Actor category. And since one person is overrepresentation for Black Americans, having equal representation means that 1 year out of the 2, you're likely not going to have any actors at all. So there was never any case put forward by Jada Pinkett Smith or by Will Smith except for them calling a wambulance, because Will Smith specifically wasn't up for an award that he wanted to win in order to soothe his ego, that Jada Pinkett Smith wanted him to win in order to soothe her ego. So she demanded that black people boycott the Oscars. This is where we got the Oscars so white thing and all of that. And Chris Rock was tapped to host the Oscars, and he didn't want to do it. And I remember Dave Chappelle talked about this, how he went with Chris Rock to the Oscars, and he got a bunch of crap for it. And again, it's not a giant deal that they went, but Jada Pinkett Smith made it a big deal and put public pressure on Chris Rock not to do this event that he actually earned because her husband were in movies that weren't very good that didn't actually earn him a nomination for Best Actor. So that's what started it. So Chris Rock started making fun of Jada Pinkett Smith, and of course the Smith camp took that way too seriously.
Part of that was a larger push, though, because black actors weren't being nominated. But critics also blasted Rock for making black people the butt of his jokes to appeal to a white audience.
Now, another absurdity is what Don Lemon just said that critics were saying about Chris Rock, that Chris Rock was making black people the butt of his jokes in order to appeal to white people. So first and foremost, Chris Rock is one of the most successful comedians of all time. He tells jokes that are meant to appeal to a bunch of different people because that's one of the ways that you become successful as a stand-up comedian, the universality of comedy. But specifically, the idea that Chris Rock tells jokes about black people to appeal to white people doesn't make any sense. Nobody laughs harder at these jokes than black Americans because these jokes are related to them and they observe phenomenons that are more commonly seen by black Americans. So this idea that he's doing this specifically, something that he's done throughout his whole entire life in order to appeal to white people, makes no sense because the people who like these jokes the most on average are likely black people. So you look at the crowd, you look at who's coming out to see Chris Rock, you look at where he did his Netflix special. I believe he did it in Baltimore. If you think he did all this for white people, you're just not paying attention. Obviously, Chris Rock is super pro-black. But of course, because Chris Rock didn't support a stupid campaign where he had to quit his own job on behalf of Will Smith not getting nominated for a movie that he wasn't good in, and the movie wasn't good, that somehow means that Chris Rock is anti-black, even though everything about this special appeals to black Americans specifically. Again, if you are going to run down the list of people that you thought were pro-black or anti-black, people would say that Will Smith probably aims the movies that he's in at a broader audience than just the black audience as compared to Chris Rock in terms of his stand-up comedy. Now, I know Will Smith's doing new stuff and his wife is doing new stuff like that series Bel Air, but if you think about the hit movies that Will Smith was in, none of them are crazy super pro-black or anything like that, but Chris Rock does entire segments and entire specials just based on the interpersonal relationships between black men and black black women, black men overall, and all of that. And some of his best bits, again, appeal to black people the absolute most. But this is one of those things where somebody is a comedian, they're kind of from the old school, so they make all kinds of jokes. So therefore, the new school of people who just like to criticize from the side and who have never achieved anything end up trying to poke holes in it because their life has never amounted to anything. And that's exactly what we're going to get from this woman over at The Root, because you're on a thing that's not popular at all, has no significant reader base, no significant viewer base, and you're using that to try to teach Chris Rock how to do comedy better.
And our next guest writes that Rock, quote, deserved to be slapped. So joining us now, the senior writer at The Root, Candace McDuffie. Good morning to you. Why did you think he deserved to be slapped?
It's not so much about being slapped as much as it is about accountability, right? He has made Black women specifically the butt of his jokes for years, and he's finally being held accountable. So I feel like this kind of sets the precedence, going forward, hopefully that people will be more careful about how they treat and discuss, Black women.
So this woman is only on here because she wrote some stupid article for The Root saying that Chris Rock deserved to be slapped because he dared make a joke about a black woman. Then she talks about how it's not really about the violence, it's about the accountability. And then she says that this sets a precedence instead of a precedent for how you should talk about black women in public life. Again, endorsing violence because you cannot make jokes about black women. What a coincidence that the woman talking to you is in fact a black woman. Isn't that interesting how this person immediately comes up with the self-serving narrative that puts her in the privileged god-tier position that dareth not be criticized?
People are going to focus on your words saying, is Candace McDuffie condoning violence, saying that, that Will Smith should have slapped Chris Rock?
I think, in the literal sense, it seems like a bit much. But honestly, sitting here, calling Jada out of her name, making fun of her hair condition, talking about her alopecia, words can be violent as well. And as we see, Black girls and women, we suffer abuse at higher rates in this country. So continuing to humiliate us only perpetuates this.
So first and foremost, words are not violence. That's ridiculous and absurd. The fact that she's putting forward this argument is dangerous because this is becoming more and more mainstream. And again, it's just an excuse to condone violence. Secondly, Jada Pinkett Smith deserved to be called out because she started with Chris Rock, as he outlined in his comedy special, by trying to get him to quit his job because her husband didn't get nominated for a movie that he did not deserve to be nominated for. She tried to make that into a racial instance. Secondly, and this is also incredibly important, alopecia is just losing your hair. That's it. It's going bald. The idea that you can't make any bald jokes is ridiculous as well. And more importantly, Chris Rock's so-called bald joke was a G.I. Jane reference. He said G.I. Jane 2, can't wait to see it. The idea that that is equivalent to violence is absurd in every possible way. And again, this needs to be pointed out for those of you out there in the audience. During the Oscars, they actually do a rehearsal the day before, and apparently Chris Rock told that joke the day before. So this was not a situation where they were even surprised by this joke, apparently. And Will Smith only hit Chris Rock in front of the camera. So yeah, ridiculous and absurd. This idea that Jada Pinkett Smith is some dramatic victim because she's dealing with some hair loss doesn't make any sense. A lot of people deal with hair loss all the time, and that makes it fine to target them for jokes because you should be able to take a joke.
A lot of people laugh, though, when they hear the jokes and they say he's a comedian, he's just being funny. Maybe you're being too sensitive about it. What do you say?
I think it speaks to a larger American pattern of using marginalized people as comedic fodder. And then it can also, lead to violence being incited. It can lead to us being not seen as human. Words and comedy have larger consequences, as we've seen in recent years.
So one of the things that's amazing about our mainstream media is that they will just drag on some of the dumbest people humanly possible to make some of the most ridiculous, contradictory arguments that one could possibly make. So she says, oh, the words are violence, ridiculous, absurd, shut up. They should have cut her off right there. That's insane. But then she says, well, listen, Chris Rock's jokes about Jada Pinkett Smith specifically trying to get him to quit his job because Will Smith wasn't nominated for an Oscar for the movie about concussions could incite violence in the real world. Therefore, Will Smith is licensed to commit violence in the real world after the joke. That makes no sense. And again, this woman is calling this accountability. She's calling for violence. She's equivocating words to violence, which, if taken into account, if taken seriously, would actually lead to violence in the real world. If you actually adopt the premise that somebody speaking, making a joke, even a black person making a joke about a black woman, the most sacred of all of our sacred individuals and symbols in our society, is an act of violence, and therefore you're okay to respond with violence, then that itself is calling for violence and will lead to more violence. It makes no sense. And the idea that Jada Pinkett Smith is being dehumanized by Chris Rock making a G.I. Jane joke, insane. The idea that she's being dehumanized by Chris Rock not quitting the Oscars because who gives a crap what Jada Pinkett Smith says, also insane.
A black woman comedian, as you know Leslie Jones, calling out what she calls, and I quote, hypocrites who are attacking Chris Rock, she says, for sharing his perspective on what happened. And another quote, he is a comedian. This is his way of expressing it. If he's saying he would write a song, because it's painful, it's a painful thing that happened. What do you say to Leslie Jones?
So I give credit to Leslie Jones. I know a lot of people don't like her because of the Ghostbusters reboot, because of SNL, because of insert reason or whatever, but she's actually standing up for comedians, which makes me very happy because what these people are doing is going beyond identity, because this woman's like, you should be in the black woman category, and sticking with their tribe of comedians and these jokes being okay. Leslie Jones actually has a decent perspective on this issue in particular.
What we saw on that stage wasn't comedy. It was comedy, but it was really pain. He hasn't healed from what's happened. And instead of kind of dealing with those emotions and those feelings, he's just taking it out and continues to take his rage and go on black women.
So if you watch Chris Rock's special, which I do recommend you watch, at least the portion about Will Smith, and by the way, there's another portion in there, which is one of the reasons why she's talking about black women rather than black woman, where he makes fun of Meghan Markle, also good stuff. You'll realize that the person who hasn't dealt with their pain, dealt with their personal issues, as described by Chris Rock in that special, is Will Smith. Jada Pinkett Smith very publicly talks about how she's sleeping around, how she slept with one of her son's friends, some 21-year-old person, and talked about it publicly, and then interviewed Will Smith on her stupid internet show publicly, and Will Smith took that embarrassment out on Chris Rock on the stage. That's the person who's not done dealing with their issues. That's the person who's being emasculated over and over again. So for Chris Rock to bear the brunt of that for a basic low-level joke that honestly was not that harsh, nor was it that funny, is ridiculous, and that's what Chris Rock put forward. But she's trying to say, oh, Chris Rock has some deep-seated issues with black women, and honestly, well, Chris Rock, man, he really needs to work that out. I mean, Will Smith slapped him across the face because he made a joke about a woman who started with him, by the way. So therefore, Chris Rock has a problem. It just makes no sense. But again, these people are just nuts.
At the end of his special, he addresses why he didn't retaliate when he got slapped. Watch this.
And you know what my parents taught me? Don't fight in front of white people.
So Chris Rock says the reason that he didn't hit Will Smith back, and by the way, he talks about a bunch of other reasons, like the fact that Will Smith is huge. There's a reason why Will Smith played Muhammad Ali in a movie, but then he says, my parents taught me to not fight in front of white people. And by the way, what he's trying to also say in there is that his parents raised him right. He's just accentuating it with the joke. But of course, this woman's going to be offended by this because she has to be offended by everything.
Does that joke bother you?
So much. You're telling me that black people can't fight in front of white people, but you can humiliate black people in front of white people. There was recently a clip that resurfaced of him with Jerry Seinfeld and Ricky Gervais and Louis C.K., where he gave Louis C.K. the pass to say the N-word. How is that okay? Right? But we have to act a certain way, but it doesn't apply to him.
This is one of the stupidest people ever to come on television to talk about an issue. So she's like, oh, I'm so offended because he's saying that black people shouldn't act a certain way in front of white people. First of all, they fight in front of white people all the time. I mean, we see the videos out there in the public, and it's quite embarrassing, but Chris Rock doesn't want to add to that embarrassment, so that's what he said. Also, again, he emphasizes that his parents raised him right. He's not going to fight back on national television. That's inappropriate to do, but she ends up coming in from out of left field saying Chris Rock gave Louis C.K. the N-word pass in this conversation with Ricky Gervais and Jerry Seinfeld. Now, I just want to point out that did not actually happen. That Chris Rock just acknowledged the fact that for some reason Louis C.K. is able to say that word on stage, whereas Jerry Seinfeld or Ricky Gervais would not be able to do so. And by the way, that conversation, it was like an HBO special where they have 4 legendary comedians discussing comedy, is hilarious, and I definitely recommend you guys hear it, see it for yourselves, because it's so good, because you have all of these people at the top of their game at that moment having this in-depth conversation. It's incredibly interesting, and they all have completely different styles of comedy. So yeah, this woman added nothing to the table. The Root is an absolutely trash publication. They employ losers like this, and if Chris Rock actually was making fun of black women, this would be the ideal, perfect target for him to do so, because there's so much wrong with this person, it almost defies words. But hey, those are just my thoughts. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you liked the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on all my social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about The Root, going on CNN, and talking crap about Chris Rock. Till next time.